Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Why all the wailing in the woods tonight, Tim? It seems like the cryptids are voicing their concern over something.
Yes, Timmy, I suspect they are. One of their close friends has departed this world.
And who is that, Tim?
Well, J.C. Johnson. I think he was about as close to Bigfoot as any human could be.
Oh, my goodness. Well, he was on our show quite a number of times and always had some fascinating stories to tell and personal encounters. I don't think anybody could get any closer to Bigfoot than J.C. managed to.
Well, I think that J.C. and Bigfoot maybe had a kind of a contentious relationship. I know there were some cases where J.C. didn't quite feel like that Bigfoot had anybody's best interest in mind except maybe his own.
Well, I do remember one time he told the story about how Bigfoot used to kind of hunker down on the other side of the railroad track, and they would kind of stare at each other and I don't know, maybe throw rocks back and forth or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was on our show that he told us the story about this one case where, some kind of giant hairy hominid had been very interested in a teenage girl that was living in a nearby house. And so JC had camped out in the nearby area, and he said that late at night he was hearing something move around, and then all of a sudden this voice from out of the woods said, "Who you be?" And he said if it was somebody out there faking it, he said they did a really good job of it.
It might have been the former senator from Alabama.
Yeah, it could
be. Sounds like it's possible. But well, tonight we're going to have in fact, tonight by no coincidence, I'm sure, our topic is going to be Bigfoot and its relationship to UFOs and other paranormal phenomena, and we've got the kings of the topic. I don't know if that's the correct phraseology, but two experts on UFOs and Bigfoot and their relationship to each other. And one gentleman, Stan Gordon, who this is his first time on our show, is an outstanding contributor. I have been digesting his information since the 1970s, just like myself. He's and I don't know how to phrase this, an old timer. We were both, Stan, were we both teenagers when we started out? I know I was, of course, around 15 or 16 or so. How old were you when you first checked all this out?
Believe it or not, I was younger. I started in 1959 when I was 10 years old.
Well, I had my first sighting, 2 UFO sightings when I was 10, so there you go. But Tim, why don't you formally introduce our guest for this evening, and then we can rock out into the woods there.
Oh, definitely. Well, and I should point out also, Tim, that I mean it's more than just UFOs and Bigfoot. I mean Stan and Paul have both been looking into very bizarre types of activity. I mean, ghosts and UFOs and other kinds of weird cryptids. Flying weirdos, so to speak, kind of like what we were talking about last week. Big cats. I mean, it's just it's overwhelming, really, just all of the bizarre activity that both of these gentlemen have been looking into. But as you pointed out, yeah, we have first of all we have Stan Gordon with us, and now Stan has been researching UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and other mysterious events in Pennsylvania since, as he said, 1959. I won't tell you how old I was in 1959, but since then he's been involved with the investigation of thousands of unusual incidents, and he's the primary investigator of the 1965 UFO crash incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. So now Stan has been on such programs, as well as our own, as the Close Encounters series on the Science Channel, Monsters and Mysteries in America on the Destination American Channel, Monumental Mysteries. I think you were on that one, weren't you, Tim, on the Travel Channel?
I was on Mysteries of the National Parks.
Oh, okay. All right. And let's see. Stan has also been in the documentaries Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which excellent film, by the way, and Wish for Giants. And Stan, you can find out more about him at his website, stangordon.info. Now, also with us tonight is our good friend Paul Eno. I think Paul probably has been on Exploring the Bizarre more than any of our other guests, Tim. We'll have to look into that and see. Probably Peter could let us know.
Well, you get an award when you come on 10 times.
Yeah, what?
A couple of copies of one of our books, like the Bell Witch Project.
Oh, I was going to say he's going to get it. I was going to say you get a gold star and a smiley face.
Well, it's a start. I have a few other requests.
But now Paul has been called the most intelligent voice in paranormal research today, and he was one of the first paranormal investigators in the early 1970s, beginning while he was studying for the priesthood. His early mentors included parapsychology pioneer Dr. Louisa Rhine, and of course the ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now Paul has also appeared on the Travel, Discovery, and History channels, and has his own radio show with his son, Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. This is on WOON 1240 AM in the Boston Providence market. So Stan, Paul, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Always a pleasure.
You know what I want to know? Without us, the gang of four here, what would all these cable channels do for guests? I mean, we are the top rung as far as the producers of the shows coming and getting a lot of material, because we have the best material. Anyway, I want to start out with Stan. You mentioned you got into this in 1959. Well, I know some of the first sightings at Kecksburg was 65.
Yeah, the Kecksburg incident occurred December 9th of 65.
Well, what were you doing before then?
I was, as a young child, I was going to the local libraries, reading all the information, talking to some local people, hearing their stories, cutting articles out of newspapers, just doing as much as I could. And then 1965 comes along, and here's this local UFO incident. Was making local and national news. I was documenting it. I was breaking news that night in the Pittsburgh area, and I began to work on the case the next day, and here we are going 53 years later, and I'm still getting information on the incident.
You talk about a UFO landing in your lap. I mean, you were how many miles away from the spot where this object supposedly came down in a wooded area?
Well, I live in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, about 12 miles away from that small rural community where it happened. I wasn't driving yet. I had no way to get out there, but I remember that night staying up very late, running back and forth between the black and white TV and the radio, trying to get the latest information. And next day I went and grabbed all the local newspapers, and there was the headlines in all the local newspapers, was making national news, and I began to follow up as best I could at that time. And over a period of many weeks and months and years, I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses. I've tracked down multitudes of important witnesses, from reporters and police officers and firemen and military sources who were involved in the incident. And it's an amazing story. We could spend days literally talking about that case and what I've uncovered, but that's a whole different story.
Well, yeah, well, I would think it's certainly one of the most famous or infamous cases in the annals of UFO history. There are, of course, those that think it was anything from a spaceship from some other planet, or a Nazi time travel Bell craft, to something manufactured here on Earth, to a meteorite. How do you fall? Where do you fall on this?
Well, there's a lot to the story, and there's a lot more than a lot of people are aware of. I've said for years I keep an open mind to all possibilities, and been multitudes of theories since the time it happened. Even the last few years, there's been new theories come out. Again, I keep an open mind to all possibilities, but theories are good, but you got to have the evidence that really associates that theory with what happened at Kecksburg. And there's a lot more to the story. And in fact, say the last 20-some years, I've uncovered some very interesting information, it's very detailed, long to get involved, which suggests the possibility that there was someone or something inside of the object, which gives you a whole different perspective of what we might be dealing with.
There was somebody. Now, I didn't catch that. There was something that what?
From the information I've obtained the last 20-some years from different sources, there's good indication that there's a possibility that there was someone or something inside of the object that fell.
Ah, well, now that's a first. I don't think I've heard that. Well, they would have had to have been pretty small and pretty cramped, right?
Yeah. I mean, the object that they saw on the ground, soon after this object fell, some of what we found out now, we didn't know at the time, was some of the local people went down into the woods. Later, that was followed by a volunteer fireman, then the military who arrived on the scene, and they come across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. It's kind of an off-gold bronze color, shaped like a big metallic acorn. It's about 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. No weld marks, no seams, no rivet marks. On the raised up part of the back of the object, where you have the back of the acorn, witnesses who were only a few feet away from it said there were these raised up markings that were more like symbols. It's a fascinating story. Mm-hmm. And regardless of what this thing was, it's just an amazing account of something that we still don't have answers for.
Well, now, how could somebody have gotten in or out of this? Was there an opening of some sort?
There was nothing that was seen because it was dirt and debris around it from the people who got down there and, at that time. And again, it was just getting dark in the area, and as time went on, it was getting darker and darker as different people came in. But according to one witness who was reluctant to talk to me about it over many, many, many years later, and then others have given me other similar information, he claimed that while he was hiding down in the woods, watching the military operation recovering this thing and loading it onto the flatbed truck as it got down there, or the military flatbed, that there was like a hatch that opened in the front of the object. And, to make the story short, he said he was hiding in the woods. He had branches of trees around him. He had to keep moving back because the military got closer and closer to where he was. But he said from what he could tell, when the hatch opened, he could see this very long, almost elastic-like arm that opened around the opening there. And he said it was a matter of seconds. When it closed, he could hear the metal-on-metal hitting. And a military officer who was actually jumped on top of the object started screaming, hurry up, we don't have much time. And that's when all these soldiers came over and they started cleaning debris around it, and they went into great detail how they used this metal strapping and how they had to winch it over to the truck because they couldn't take the truck right down to the crash site, and they had a small, like a little crane down there that they used to lift it onto the flatbed truck. and more than one person has confirmed the small crane being involved in the incident as well. It's a very long, very, very detailed account. We learned from so many different people. I just gave you the very short version of that one aspect of the case.
And I was surprised to hear today or see on the this movie Chestnut Ridge that there were unidentified agents. I guess we would identify them as the Men in Black in today's terminology. So there are quite a number of aspects to this. We'll have to do a show some evening just on Kecksburg and bring everybody up to date on it, because, like you say, there really is still so much going on.
Oh yeah, it's an amazing, amazing story, and there's so much mystery and intrigue, and the multitudes of people I've interviewed, even today, the multitudes of people I've talked to, most of them have never gone public. Quite a number have. Many of those people, unfortunately, have now passed away. A lot of the witnesses are now up in age, and a lot of them are not in very good health, which is unfortunate. But I've documented all the information, and it's just a fascinating story of whatever this thing may have been.
That had to have been frustrating, though, for you at 10 years old to have something like that happening so close to you and not have the ability just to jump into your car and drive over there. Did you beg your parents to take you?
I was 16 when it happened. If I remember, I think my mother had already passed away, and I believe my father was out of town at that time. And so it was the next day till we could find out. And at that time, there was so little information about it and so little detail that there's not much we could do about it. It was quite a while later, as time went on, that we were able to get a pretty good idea where this thing may have actually fallen on private property. And there was a lot involved back at that time. And finally, years later, I was able to independently find witnesses who had been down to the site. So I had independent witnesses who didn't know each other, who took me down into those dense woods from different locations, took me down to the same exact place down in the woods, which is what really was convincing when you had these people who didn't know each other in this thickly wooded area, and they all end up taking me to the same location. And there we found this pattern of tree damage and trees knocked down, top of trees broken out, and it was very fascinating.
So there's still evidence even today that something
the evidence,
unusual
unfortunately, is pretty much gone because many of those trees now are old trees. They've fallen from storms. So a lot of what we had back then, unfortunately, in recent years when I was down, I could barely even recognize the site. And you can't go on the property anyhow. It's still on private property.
Interesting. So, what about Chestnut Ridge? Now, we're going to have the director of the film on later on this evening. And from looking at this documentary, I mean, it seems like that there is a plethora of activity in this area. Now, has that always been the case? I mean, have you had the opportunity to look back on the history and see whether or not this has happened, like hundreds of years ago, or at least as long as people have been living in that area? Or is this something that has started to happen more recently?
No, it's been going on for years and years. And from my memory, from what I recall, it was the late 1960s. I think it was about 1969. And, of course, that's when I set up my hotline for the public to report UFO sightings. It's been active ever since. And I remember getting a call from a police department about a daylight sighting of two huge, big, cigar-shaped objects at treetop level. I believe it was around New Alec, Pennsylvania. And people were pulling their cars off the road to watch these objects, and I got involved. And when I'm out there interviewing people, I began to hear some of the locals tell me about, not far down the road, along this area of the Chestnut Ridge, about things that they had been seeing for years. And there were everything, even back in those days, I was hearing about underground sounds. I remember somebody talking about seeing like an opening in the side of the mountain, somebody said they saw back in the 60s. And there were a lot of UFO reports and other things going on. When I was in high school, I graduated in 1967, some of my friends who knew I was interested in these things, they would come up to me and tell me about taking their girlfriends out parking at one of the cemeteries out in that area, and they would come to me with accounts of seeing what they said was a gorilla that came out of the woods throwing rocks at their cars. Well, that turned out to be historically one of the most active areas, and still is, in the country for Bigfoot activity all the time along the dairy side of the Chestnut Ridge. So that Chestnut Ridge, that activity goes back, I mean, there's very old newspaper accounts talking about strange things up around there. I know of instances going back to at least the 1930s up in the Chestnut Ridge and that general area. So that Chestnut Ridge is about a 100-mile-long mountain range that extends from Preston County, West Virginia, to Westmoreland, where I'm at, Fayette in Indiana County in southwest Pennsylvania. It has been for years and years and yearly, and recently is last year, some very strange reports going all the time. And these include UFO sightings, what I call mini UFOs, where these objects are only a few inches to a foot in diameter. They've approached people within feet. The reports that are up there, all kind of cryptid sightings, from Thunderbird sightings, they're giant birds, black panthers, many Bigfoot sightings, other weird phenomena, mystery booms, unexplained lights going up and coming down over the ridge, just all kind of weird things. And it's a yearly phenomenon. And for years and years, my team, especially in the 70s, when we had the biggest outbreak in history every quarter with Bigfoot and UFOs that went on for months in this area, and was covered widely on the news. And that's when I had my teams of research people, scientists and engineers investigating cases, and we were responding to cases day and night. So we were on the scene within minutes to hours documenting all these cases, which is what I wrote about my Solid Invasion book. And that's when we began to uncover some of the strangest incidents ever documented with UFOs and Bigfoot being seen together. And it was something we weren't not looking for. And since that time, I've uncovered a lot of very strange aspects of not only Bigfoot, but other cryptids as well. And more, as reluctant as I am to say it, it seems that we're dealing with something that might be interdimensional in nature, which is why there's no bodies of any of these creatures.
Well, to me, that makes a lot more sense than the flesh and blood type of creatures, because you would think that if there are as many running around as there seems to be due to all the sightings, that there'd be children going to kindergarten being snatched off the street quite often, and being devoured by these things. Yet they seem to run across the field and disappear into the woods, and then they're never seen again. And I know from history that they've been taken after with bloodhounds and helicopters during some really heavy activities. Yet they just seem to vanish in the mist, so to speak.
Well, that's what we were finding back in the 73 and the 74 when this massive both UFO and Bigfoot outbreak occurred. And as reports are coming in, got to remember, back in those days, there's no internet, there's no cell phones. A lot of the reports were initially coming into the police departments and being referred over to my groups to investigate. So we were on the scene very quickly. And in some
all right,
cases,
Stan, let me interrupt you here because we have to go to our break. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. And I encourage our listeners to let our guests know if you have any questions or comments about anything that they're talking about tonight. We want to hear from you. However you want to get it to us, we'll listen to you, won't we, Tim? We love your questions.
Remember, they could always jump in the chat room, but right. keep a low profile. You don't want to hit your head there on the. Hey, we talk about today. These areas of paranormal interest. Window areas, zones of the unexplained. It goes back to 1965 when I first met John Keel. And he had just come back, believe it or not, from investigating the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. My friend and longtime buddy, now deceased, of course, Jim Mosley, used to have meetings twice a month here in Manhattan. He would rent a hotel, like lecture hall. You know, in those days you could get it for $25 or $30 around the Times Square area, and we would get anywhere from 50 to 200 or 300 people if the guest was on Long John's show the night before, and John Keel would entertain us. I guess that's the best description, with stories of the paranormal and all the weird things that was happening to him, which included visits by mysterious agents and creepy incidents in his apartment a couple of blocks from here in Kips Bay. And of course, now he had gone down to West Virginia to investigate, or to actually look into a flying cat, or a cat with wings, which I actually have a photo of in this Winged Wonder a book that's coming out in a week or so. And while he was down there, the reports of the Mothman came to his attention, and he has started to investigate it. But he also used to sit up on a hill outside of Point Pleasant and watch these strange objects in the sky. And he tried to tell us that there was a relationship between these mysterious objects and things that were going on at a ground level, whether they be sightings of the creature, or Indrid cold, or some other shadow beings. And he tried to link them together, and of course, not having too much of a background in such paranormal activity at the time, we kind of poo-pooed his sighting reports and thought perhaps he was joking with us, or trying to entertain us, because certainly there was no way that there would be an interrelationship between all of these phenomena. Of course, in the next couple of years after that, when I got out on the road myself, I began to see that there was a correlation. I remember I went to the town of Athens, Ohio, and there was a report that I was investigating of a object that had landed in a farmer's cornfield behind his house. Now, when I say cornfield, we're not talking about acres and acres of corn, maybe an acre of corn, if that. But his grandson had supposedly seen this object back there, in the cornfield, and it had left an impression on the ground. And he wanted me to go to the spot. Well, I wasn't going to get myself all torn up going back. You know how corn stalks are. So I took him at his word, but I canvassed the neighborhood, very rural neighborhood, and knocked on people's doors and asked them if they had a UFO sighting or had seen anything strange that night. And there were people that reported to me that they had seen mysterious objects in the sky, but they also started telling me about other weird events that were going on in their life, including the sighting in the same vicinity of Bigfoot, or some sort of cryptid creature, just around the same time as the UFOs were skipping around in the sky overhead. So after hearing 4 or 5 of these reports that there was a connection between the two subjects, I began to realize, well, we must be dealing with something here that is not flesh and blood, in the sense that we think of it, that UFOs may not just be from Mars and Venus, but they could be from a parallel dimension, or they could be from another time-space continuum. And the Bigfoot and other cryptid creatures march along right with them from one zone to the other. Now, Paul Eno, who is the host, along with his son Ben, of Behind the Paranormal, got caught up in a recent series of events in Pennsylvania, apparently not too far from this Chestnut Ridge area that Stan was just talking about before the break, and this also includes the sighting of UFOs in the sky and mysterious creatures on the ground, and perhaps some even shadowy agents keeping a track of the activity in the area. So, Paul, why don't we go back to when this all started, as far as the sightings in Pennsylvania? What area are we talking about, and how did you get involved in this window area?
Well, actually, it's surrounding the city of Du Bois, that area down as far as Reynoldsville and that vicinity, in sort of west central Pennsylvania, a little bit to the south, maybe 200 or so odd miles from Pittsburgh. And William J. Hall, whom I believe he's been on your show, beat me to it in writing a book about our Connecticut Litchfield Triangle.
Yes, he has been on the show, and we have to have him back on again.
Right. Yeah, he's coming out with another book. So he writes them faster than I do. So the woman from this vicinity read that book and said, "My gosh, this is the same kind of stuff we have going on here: Bigfoot, UFOs, military activity, ghosts. But you name it. You know, things that don't even have names yet. There were horses being heard galloping down the hallways of their home." Ben and I took up this case. He was 13 years old. It was one of his first cases, and it was in 2005. And usually things take a while to get used to you, but the first thing that happened to me, a horse went galloping by in the driveway. It's a rural area, but still, you could feel the breeze from it. The leaves were moving on the trees close to the ground. It was quite striking, and so that's how that began. And Bill wrote a book about this, and the woman in Pennsylvania read this and said, this is similar to what was sort of happening here. So in May of 2016, I went out there with Shane Searway. Now, I don't know if Shane's been on your show. If he hasn't, he should be. Shane is one of the few.
Yes, he has.
Okay, so you know the caliber of this fellow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shane is one of the few investigators we will work with. I first met him. We've been working together for almost 20 years. Met in a case in Rhode Island, and I was astounded that he had the same goofy theories that I have and that Ben and I have about, in this case, a ghost situation, which is that you're dealing not so much with death as with parallel worlds, okay, and take it from there. So we went out there, and we had a number of things that occurred within 3 days of our arrival, and we talked with the family and got the whole story, and then they introduced us to a number of neighbors to whom things had happened. And of course, this is the thing: it's never just, in our opinion, located in one piece of property or one family or one house, but the more you look, the more you're going to find. As you did, Tim, and knocking on doors and asking people. I don't know if I'd have that kind of gall. I'd kind of wait to be introduced, but I guess you got it done. So we had a first meeting there with upwards of 20 families who came to the neighborhood meeting, and every single family, they had been sightings of Bigfoot and UFOs, sometimes in relatively close proximity. We staked out the area, and Shane and I slept in different places on the property for several nights. And Shane himself encountered in broad daylight, although it was a rainy day, he was sitting in his truck down in a clearing below the main part of the property where we began this investigation. And he looked up between, maybe he told you this on the air, but he looked up, and there between two trees was a large, hairy something that he assumed was a bear, because there are bears around here. And he started up toward it in his truck, and the thing took off to its right, Shane's left, with huge arms moving up and down and moving on two legs. And in the process, the creature flushed 3 deer who went bounding off. And that was the first major sighting of our party, again, within a few days of arriving there. We also interviewed a number of families in their homes, one of whom had shadow people problems and had strange lights appearing over their house almost every night, which we saw on several occasions, almost like the glowing orb type things, light balls, as Ted Phillips would describe them, Ted from Missouri. And then on another trip in September of that year, we had gotten a number of photographs of strange things kind of in the sky, gathered all sorts of stories of low-flying C-130s dropping odd filament-like things over the area. This is why I think Stan would be interested in this. And we were, so I stationed myself up in the lot, the field above the main house with my truck, and I was by myself. Shane was in another part of the property, and I had the passenger window up because it was a little chilly. Very, very brilliant moonlit night. If you have good memories, you remember September 16th, 2016. It was a brilliant moonlit light in the Northeast, a night, I should say, and but kind of chilly. So I have my camera set up. I'm looking for strange lights in the sky. Now after going on 50 years of dealing with the paranormal, I should know that the things never happen the way you expect them to or when you expect them to. So sure enough, I'm kind of looking onto my left, and on my right, something catches my eye, and in this brilliant moonlight, there is a huge brown-furred, two-legged creature walking up about 200 feet to my right, because we measured it off the next day. We found a path where something large and with two legs had gone through the field, coming up toward the center of the field with its head bowed as if looking for something. So I snap a picture with the infrared camera through the cold window. Obviously, there's no signature. And then I try and get out of the truck. And then, of all things, my wife calls. Now, Paul, why didn't you shut off the cell phone? Well, who's going to call me in the middle of a field in the middle of the night, in Pennsylvania? So my ringtone, the theme from Lord of the Rings, goes blasting out over this field. So naturally, whatever this was gone. So all of a sudden, maybe a minute or two later, I see lights up in a tree on the other side of this field, perhaps about the same distance away, maybe 200, 250 feet. And they didn't look weird or UFO, like they looked like somebody had a spotlight. So I didn't want to drive over there. I didn't know if there were any yawning chasms that would swallow my truck. So at the neighborhood meeting, the next morning, Shane and I went out there. We measured everything off, and Shane is 6 feet high in his stocking feet, and this thing was about a foot and a half to 2 feet taller than he was. So meanwhile, at the neighborhood meeting that evening, I was telling this story, and a hand went up, and it was a woman named Melissa who lived on the other side of the field in another house. And she said, "Oh, those lights, that was me. My son and I came home, and we heard something big moving through that field. At the same time, I was seeing it. They went up into the field to try and see what it was, but of course it was gone. And because they're not afraid, they're so used to this stuff, they're not afraid of these things. So it's funny that we always ask people, what did you feel during this experience? Because, I'm not saying it was Bigfoot, but I can't imagine anything else it would have been with that size. So people will say, well, sometimes I was terrified. There was a little girl on our second neighborhood meeting who was so terrified to tell us about her Bigfoot experience, because who are these two weird guys from New England? So, but we hope next time we go to talk to her. A very scary experience. But I felt privileged, and I felt honored, and it was a very, very special and almost spiritual experience. So that's all I can tell you. This stuff has been going on in Pennsylvania for many, many years. The site itself is very interesting archaeologically. University of Pennsylvania researchers have been up there. There appears to have, there's some theory that there was a meteor impact in the roundabout the end of the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s. Nobody told me this when I was up on a hill that is full of iron, because I have a metal allergy, and I really, I had to go to bed for 2 hours. So there's all this sorts of stuff. Now, one of the things, and Stan may be interested in this because this has been coming up for maybe about the past year. The area from this area down the ridge, down all the way to Pittsburgh, all the way down the Ohio Valley to eastern Kentucky, the Panther Ridge areas where we're only just getting started investigating that situation. A lot of Bigfoot there. You have in that whole line what is known as rather interesting instances of the Bouguer anomaly, Bouguer. and that is a gravitational anomaly. And I'm not saying it's anything to do with it, but it's intriguing. It's very often present in river valleys, particularly the Ohio, and all the way down through the area where you have the things we're discussing, all the way down to the Mothman country of West Virginia and Ohio, all the way down through eastern Kentucky, and you've got this Bouger anomaly. Now, what it is it essentially makes gravity lighter as you walk downhill into a valley. This was discovered when people were researching areas for oil and gas deposits, and you look for certain minerals. And it apparently has an effect on gravity that makes it lighter as you go farther toward the center of the Earth, whereas usually that's not the case. Now, again, it's measurable, but it's not something you would feel as you do walk down the hills. But nevertheless, it is intriguing. What did Einstein say about gravity? It can bend space and time. Possibly, this may be one clue that we'd want to pursue further in investigating why this is present in these flap areas. In our Connecticut case, where is the strongest Bouger anomaly in Connecticut? And it's right there, Litchfield, Goshen, Torrington, right in the center of what we refer to as the Litchfield Triangle, where all these weird things are going on. And you've got Bigfoot, weird lights, military activity. Why? Because maybe they'd love to militarize the paranormal. Wouldn't they like to know where Bigfoot goes to and comes from? And one question I'm sure that Stan has embraced this question as well, or wondered about it. Certainly, in an area like Western Pennsylvania or the areas that we've been researching as far as this case is concerned, it's farm country. There are no huge wilderness areas. You've got woods of maybe 10, 15, 20 acres. There is no place for a population, and a breeding population, I've been told, you'd expect to be about 500 individuals over a certain area of square miles. And you don't have that in this area. You've got farms, towns, and relatively small woodlots. Where does Bigfoot come from and go? Never mind the lights that are associated with it. Ghosts, apparently they can be anywhere if you want to call them ghosts. So these are all questions that we've encountered, but I'm intrigued by the parallels that seem to be taking place in our work and in Stan's as well.
Well, it's not just Bigfoot, though. I mean, as Stan pointed out, there's been sightings of, like the Thunderbirds,
sure.
or pterodactyl-like creatures.
Yeah.
That's something you wouldn't expect to be walking through the woods and find a breeding population.
Indeed. Also, upright canine cryptids, as Linda Godfrey calls them, rather aptly. Nobody dares say werewolves, And
Dogman is our friend.
Oh, really? Is that right? Well, we're going to talk to you because we need to talk to him. But there have been outbreaks of that sort of thing in Pennsylvania as well. So, and again, things that you never could make up. Now, I haven't encountered these yet, but in the Connecticut case, they have sort of these boxy entities kind of bouncing by people's windows. We have a photograph taken by a security camera in an area of the Litchfield County, Connecticut, where all sorts of outbreaks I should say break-ins were occurring, and nothing was stolen. And people put a security camera in their house. When they weren't home, they got a picture of this very, very strange, human-sized, dare I say, reptilian creature or lizard-like creature standing at their sink. It's very detailed. You can see this. I mean, these are things that don't even have names yet. So, and they're all present in these areas of the Bouger anomaly, if that does have anything to do with it, and all sorts of other flap areas that we have described as we've carried on our discussion here.
Well, that was one of the things that John Keel pointed out in several of his books, that a lot of this activity seems to center around areas across the country and across the world, I suppose, if you took the time to look at it, over areas that have, magnetic anomalies.
Sure, yeah. And the rivers as well, because unless water is distilled, it will conduct electricity and electromagnetic fields and this sort of things. But this is all speculation. But I think a lot of people are interested in this, and they're also we haven't had a chance to get into this in Pennsylvania yet, but in the Connecticut case, you have glaring instances of public changes in behavior, and and so we've been researching this. On top of Mohawk Mountain in Connecticut is an ordinary cell tower, and also a tower with equipment such as I've never seen. Now, my military experience is, 35 and 40 years old. Nevertheless, I have tried to keep up with it, and I've never seen stuff like this. And there were all kinds of weird things happening in the population in 2009, 2010 when the military was running around in there. So I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg.
Well, and that's been the contention of some investigators, is that there is an interest by the military on paranormal activity. I mean, and you wouldn't think that would be the case.
Well, we even had Joshua Warren, who was one of the chief investigators on the Brown Mountain Lights up there in North Carolina. Apparently has tied it in with a military activity where huge, numbers of troops would show up, blockade themselves in a certain area, and not allow tourists or locals to trespass, and have all their food delivered, and not allowed to leave these little settlements. What are they doing up in the mountains there in North Carolina? Of course, there does seem to be some sort of energy there in the ground. I mean, I don't know if that's responsible for the lights themselves, but there does seem to be some sort of weird phenomena that goes back again hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's true. But again, what would they be keeping secret? It's not just UFOs; it's Bigfoot, and many areas of the paranormal. I don't know if this has happened to you, but particularly we were on doing the Rendlesham series we did on CBS and on our own stations in Rhode Island. It just, or I should say, we had to go to an internet station because CBS corporate wouldn't let us continue because of all the weird interference, laughing in a brand new spanking studio. That we could. It was just bizarre. So these, I don't know, that could be diversionary as well. Who knows?
Almost like a paranormal activity.
Well, that's it. But I mean, these things can be strategic as well. I mean, there are all sorts of questions about this, and things are never what they appear to be in the paranormal.
Well, I find it interesting. You said, like interference and laughing.
Yeah.
I mean, how many cases have you run across, where people have been talking on the phone in a haunted house and be interrupted with voices and, spectral laughing and stuff? Well, and we've got our own spectral voice getting ready to come up here in just a few seconds. So we are going to our top of the hour break. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Stan Gordon and Paul Eno on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned for more.
It only gets stranger.
Exploring the Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre, and we're talking with Stan Gordon and Paul Eno tonight about all the weird activities that are taking place in Pennsylvania, and well, not just Pennsylvania, but other locations there on the eastern part of the United States, Connecticut, places like that. But Stan, I wanted to ask you. I just recently saw a really interesting story that you posted about the police officer there in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, there in August 2017. And I always find it fascinating the accounts that you're able to find that come from the police. You want to tell us a little bit about the story that I'm talking about?
Yeah, I will. And, as Paul mentioned, some of the cryptid reports I'm receiving in the last few years are things that we don't even have a name for because they're so strange and unusual. And that's the kind of things that are going on. And I wanted to mention also, from what Paul was talking, it just shows if you take the time to go out there and do really detailed investigation, Paul and I are coming across basically the same things. I mean, I started writing about this back in the 70s about all the interaction between the paranormal, strange lights, Bigfoot, other cryptids. It's been going on for years and years. It's going on all over the country and around the world. I've been in touch with many researchers for years in many places, and many people in the UFO field, of course, don't want to associate UFOs and Bigfoot, and many in the Bigfoot field, of course, do not want to associate Bigfoot with UFOs. But it's a phenomenon which we just don't have the answers for, and I've noticed in more recent years, more and more people in the Bigfoot field are beginning to question what's going on out there, and are beginning to ask the same question they did years ago. Why don't we have any bodies, and why are these strange lights showing up commonly in areas with a lot of history of Bigfoot? But going back to the officer's report, it was a very interesting case. This occurred in late August of last year. The police officer, a very experienced officer, was on patrol in an area that he patrols all the time. And he had contacted me a short time after he had this encounter. And he's riding down this back road, and he notices this dull ball of light that appears to be on the ground. And he's thinking, well, I don't know of any artificial lighting around here. It's unusual. He stopped his vehicle he's watching, and suddenly this light, this round light, suddenly rises up or stands up from the ground. And he said what he observed was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. He was having a very hard time trying to figure out what this thing was. And he said the ball of light was actually the head of a very strange being that looked to be about 7 feet tall or larger. He said it was tall and almost skeletal thin. He said that he was the opinion it had been lying on its belly on the ground with its head facing towards the road when he first saw it. Then it stood up, faced the road, and in the dark location, he saw the dull light from the glowing head was illuminating the upper section of the body. As he watched, it turned towards the right, and he could see the illumination lighting up part of the shoulders. Then it turned the face towards him, turned to the left, and immediately took off at an incredible speed. He said the speed was abnormal. He said it was fascinating he'd ever seen. It was there, and then it was gone, which is very interesting because in recent years, various UFO witnesses, cryptid witnesses are saying the same thing. It was here, and suddenly it was just gone. And he said as he watches this thing, he said he assumed it moved on 2 legs, but he couldn't see the lower extremities in the dark. And he said the head was about 8 to 10 inches diameter, kind of shaped like a ball, but he said it could possibly have been more egg-shaped as well. And the light was a dull white. It illuminated the shoulders, the top of the chest, a section of the arms. He could not see the hands. The chest looked to be about 18 inches across. The waist appeared to be small, but the arms were abnormally long. And he said the long limbs looked skeletal with no muscle mass, and that the skin tone appeared to be kind of a grayish blue. He could not see any facial features. And he said it only lasted about 10 seconds, but he got a good look at this thing. As it ran off, he pulled his patrol car up, shined his spotlight on the area, looked around for evidence on the ground, but didn't see anything. And then, to make things even more interesting, I got a report several weeks later, around the 3rd week of September, from another area of Westmoreland County, not really that far from where this occurred. And another witness described to me seeing something somewhat similar, but it was not glowing. But the person described the head similar, said the color was odd and gave the impression it was sickly and in poor health. It looked to be kind of a very light cream to ivory color. Couldn't see any facial features, but this creature had come out of the woods and approached very close to this person, who became very frightened and ran off. And then, just in the last week, Lon Strickler over there at Phantoms and Monsters published a report. He had called me about it with some similarities of an incident happened in a suburb of Pittsburgh, so once again in a more populated area, that just occurred February 3rd of this year. And when I saw the sketch of this creature, it had some similarities to what the police officer described. So we have 3 possible reports of something similar, within several months, not really that far away as the crow flies, and it's very fascinating. But, something else Paul brought up was some of the different similarities in the reports. And one thing I found years ago was that many close-range, low-level UFO sightings, we're not talking lights in the sky, we're talking large structured craft, very low to witnesses, very low to the ground, sometimes on the ground, as well as many of the very close-range cryptid encounters. So we're talking Bigfoot, Black Panthers, Thunderbirds, other strange creatures. They commonly occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So a lot of sightings around power plants, high-tension power lines, cell phone, radio communication towers, railroad tracks, gas wells, gas lines, goes on and on and on. I've said for a long time there's definitely an energy connection to the phenomena we're dealing with.
Oh yeah, that's. I know that researchers have noticed that angle for a long time, especially the high tension power lines that run across the country.
Yep.
Especially UFO sightings that we're seeing to actually, it's almost like they were following them across the country.
Oh yeah, and in many cases these things hovering. I mean, right over the power stations, right over the high tension lines. Sometimes something attaching from the object to the power line.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing photographs. I think Ray Palmer printed it back in the 1960s from Australia of these brightly lit, I guess I would call them pie pads, except you couldn't see. They were discs, and they were hovering directly over some high tension lines. And they were photos were taken by a teenage fellow there at the time, and were printed in the papers in Australia, and even the Jenny Randall's over there in the UK. I did remember she did an article for us when we were publishing UFO Universe magazine, and it was about the sightings that had taken place in the areas around high tension lines. So. In fact, it repeatedly in some cases where these things have actually been seen, people, I don't know why they exactly buy a home that's 50 feet or 50 yards away from a high tension line in their backyard, but they seem to have an awful lot of trouble when it comes to this weird sort of, phenomena. Even their TV sets sometimes being taken over radio and TV transmissions and things along that line. Well, now, Stan, were there any reports of actual contacts in the area where people were seeing these UFOs and reported having some sort of face-to-face encounters with beings?
It's a very long, complicated subject. I've worked on hundreds of Bigfoot sightings and thousands of UFO cases over the years, and it's non-ending and goes on all the time, even in recent weeks. But I looked into the alleged abduction reports. I was probably one of the first in the country to get deeply involved in the late 60s. And you got to remember now, we were getting a lot of reports. And my first group was founded in 1970. And over the years, I founded 3 different research groups, a lot of research people involved. And we're doing this basically out of our own time and pockets, and we are being overwhelmed with reports. And, I mean, you could spend months and years just on one alleged contactee or abduction report. But we had some very significant reports. And, Bigfoot sightings, just like with UFOs, they go on all over the state of Pennsylvania. But there's some areas where there's more than normal activity. And the area that Paul talked about up around Du Bois has had a long history of these things going on. I worked on many cases there for years and years. So you're going up through Du Bois, around Punxsutawney, Clearfield, Tionesta, up to around Kenzua Dam, up in the Allegheny National Forest. It's an area that has all kind of weird things. Even the last couple of years, if you go to my website, you can see some of those cases on there. But in the last few years, there have been, as you talked about, Bigfoot, Thunderbirds, weird other cryptid reports. It just goes on and on and on. So, yes, the answer to your question, there have been alleged contact reports, mainly going back to the 60s and maybe early 70s, in some of the areas where some of this was going on. I don't know how it relates to it, but, again, these things go on all over Pennsylvania, but there are certain areas that seem to have more activity than others, and sometimes, as Keel mentioned, you call it a window area, a target area. And this is going on right now. I know of at least 2 locations here in Pennsylvania. This has been going on now for the last few years, where these were people's properties that did not have anything unusual going on, which suddenly they began to experience all kind of phenomena, from strange screams and cries to strange footprints, paranormal phenomena, Bigfoot encounters, UFO encounters, and sometimes this phenomenon will focus on an area for maybe just days or weeks or months or years. And other people sometimes begin to experience in the same area. And this phenomena, I said years ago, the phenomena is so strange, it protects itself. Because who's going to believe it unless you experience it yourself?
Well, no, what about, okay, now, and I realize, and either one of you can answer this, or both of you, do you think that these occurrences are deliberate or an after effect of something? I don't know if that's a clear question, but I suppose, is there an intelligence going on here, or we're seeing like a residual effect of some kind of natural phenomena, like like Paul had talked about, like maybe some kind of dealing with parallel universes, that there's some kind of warp in time and space, and you're getting like a bleed through effect almost.
Well, if I may, it could be all of the above. I mean, we don't know. I think one problem is our language, and I've said this before. It's just our language. Really, no language is really up to actually talking about this stuff. Neither is our very narrow paradigm. The trouble with us is that we'll take. Okay, you see a wispy thing, you think it's Uncle George, floating through your living room 2 years after his funeral. Well, that's not necessarily what it is. The labels we put on things are based on our limited way of understanding. It could be anything, but we will take things. It's almost like psychic pareidolia. I mean, we will take things and make them make sense. So that when I saw that, whatever I saw in that Pennsylvania field that night in September of 16, it might have been a Bigfoot. It might have been, we might place the term alien on it because it was very other compared to what we're used to. These ghosts, are they real? I'm often, perhaps the best way to illustrate this is that there are a couple of headliners from MUFON who will consult with very often, because they'll be investigating a case of abduction. And all of a sudden, in the person's house, poltergeist activity starts in, and stuff that they would consider "quote unquote" demonic, and things that, or they'll see a cryptid, things that don't usually are not usually associated with the UFOs. So these crossover phenomena, bleed throughs, Tim, I think is a very good way to put it. I think that John Keel, Jacques Vallée, other people. Have seen this as, going way beyond the 19th century ideas of what these things are, and sort of a pan-paranormal approach to things that were traditionally thought to be separate. And Stan obviously is seeing that, so are we, and maybe it's the first day of school. But I think that we can also get into some very deep concepts such as the hologram, which to us is a variation of the multiverse thing, but it's a little bit different approach. And there is actual, there are actual physicists who are very credible, who are speculating about everything we see around us and ourselves even being a hologram projected by what or who? God, aliens, the gods. I mean, who knows? I mean, the more questions we think we may be approaching an answer to, there are 10 more questions that arise. So I don't know, Stan has something to say about this.
I agree exactly what you're saying. I don't think anybody has the answer to what we're dealing with. I don't think the government does. I have no doubt they know a lot more than telling the public, but I'm convinced that they're trying to figure out what's going on themselves. And yes, I've seen over the years, in some of the cases I worked on, there was some indication about the possibility that the government got involved in some of these incidents. And I've seen indications that there's an interest in both Bigfoot and UFOs by our government in some of these cases. I've heard this from other researchers as well. But from what I've seen over and over again over the years is that we're dealing with a phenomena that has a physical and a non-physical component to it. That under certain conditions that come into our physical reality, they can look physically solid, but not in all cases are they, including with Bigfoot, even Black Panthers and other cryptids. They can leave evidence and then they're gone. They come and they go, and it's a very, very strange phenomenon we're dealing with.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I asked that question is because that a lot of times when people have told me about their own personal sightings, a lot of times they will say, they'll see, like some kind of, like you said, something so bizarre, we don't even have a name for it, like walking down the street of their neighborhood, and whenever this thing notices that it's being seen, it acts surprised. Shocked almost. I've had a number of people tell me that when they realized it was being looked at, it almost like jumped out of its skin. It was so surprised.
There you go. That's exactly right. Vaughn Strickler and I have been talking about in his radio show for several years. I started talking about some of the cryptid cases I've had in the last few years where people were very close to these creatures, and as soon as they realized they were seen, they could even see the look on their faces. They were like completely startled and just like shocked that they could be seen. And I said to Lon, I think this is an important clue to what we're dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. Linda Godfrey will talk about that as well. That very often these creatures, there's some indication, particularly with EMPs, apparent EMPs, the electromagnetic pulses that stop vehicles in the midst of sightings, things of this sort, electrical phenomena, that the creature is just as surprised to be, shall I say, partially in our world just as we are to be in that sort of thing. So it's a mutual experience. I mean, we've run into ghosts who were convinced that we were ghosts haunting them because they saw us as we saw them. They were going about their normal lives, day to day, and all of a sudden these weird, guys show up, or wispy figures or glowing figures they saw, and this is the indication we have.
That's like the Nicole Kidman movie, The Others.
Well, somebody made me. I don't usually watch a lot of movies because I don't want people to accuse me of coming up with these ideas, even though I was writing about this stuff in the 70s. I don't think they got it quite right. I did see that one, and but I don't know. We don't talk about that, but they were getting there, but I think they blew it in the end.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a movie. What do you expect?
Yeah. Hollywood rarely gets it right anyway.
Right. Well, and what interests me with all this is the idea that, like Stan had pointed out, is that you've got these things that seem to be almost alternating back and forth between realities, which makes me wonder, are there other realities where they're seeing, cars and planes and kids, going to school and reporting it to their authorities and being laughed at and called crazy? I mean, does it work both ways?
Well, that's it. I mean, there are all sorts of questions that arise in that regard, but we're often confronted with the disclosure movement, and that comes up because remember I was on a panel with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who's a dear friend, but we agreed that it's that it's Thursday and maybe the sun is shining, but that's the only thing we agree on. But she is a big believer in the disclosure movement, but I think that's naive. I mean, who believes what the government says? And there are many times where we encounter people in these flap areas, and they might appear to be the government, might appear to be the military, but I personally have my doubts. Don't forget, there is a huge corporate interest in technology, and everything really comes down to money in our society. and I think that there may be private interests who are carrying on some of this research. There are private security companies that may look like soldiers, and so these are all questions that I think have to be considered.
Well, okay, though, have you ever considered that some of these sightings of soldiers and military vehicles and things like that may actually be part of the phenomena itself?
Yes, we have considered that. Mark D'Antonio, who is a very close associate of ours, a dear friend, and works with us on these flat area cases. He's an astronomer, and he is MUFON's national director of video and photo analysis. We call him our killjoy photo analyst, right? Because he always finds some kind of, not always, but he said when he was a young boy, he lives in this Litchfield County flap area kind of place. And he said when he was a young boy, he was driving with his father, and he came to one of the roads where there are phenomena happening to this day. And he saw that there were some very almost like antique fire engines and firefighters in old uniforms with police officers. And the police officer said, "Sir, you can't drive this. You have to turn around." I said, "What is this?" So, he went and drove, and then they circled around and came back. Everything was gone. No firefighters, no police officers. So, again, all sorts of possibilities for what this could be.
Almost like a time slip. And Stan, before you answer here, we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. We'll bring this back up around again when we come back for more Exploring the Bizarre with our guests Stan Gordon and Paul Eno. So stay tuned. You too, Tim.
Indeed.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Tim, it makes it sound like we're hovering right there, right next to the high tension lines ourselves. Maybe we're causing some of this phenomena to take place. It's all because of us that Bigfoot is wandering the woods along Chestnut Ridge. Speaking of Chestnut Ridge, I just saw a very incredible movie this afternoon. Actually, it's my second viewing of it. It's produced and directed by Seth Breedlove, who's been on our program several times, and he has a film production company, Small Town Monsters, and his most recent entry into the film land is a movie that Stan Gordon is featured in. In fact, I would say that the Stan is the star of the movie, unless you want to maybe include a Bigfoot in there. But Stan, tell us, how did you get involved with this particular project?
Well, Seth had contacted me that he was interested in doing a documentary on the incidents along the Chestnut Ridge. He was familiar with the many years of research I did on it, and I'm a little choosy of different projects I get called to do, but I knew about the great documentaries and the professionalism that he had done on his other documentaries, and we discussed it more, and I decided to do the project. And I think it came out very good. I know it's gotten some great reviews out there on Amazon, and for the first time, I was able to get some witnesses who had experienced phenomena along the ridge, mainly with cryptids, to come on and tell the stories for the first time. And I think it came across very well. And I've heard some very good response from people who have seen the film.
I'm looking here at the ad on Facebook. It says, "Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. In a place shrouded in mystery, a force from beyond our reality arrived." And you've got some, well, now there's a particular incident in there, and maybe you can describe it in more detail, where these creatures were following the fence post, and they were giants, or they seemed to be taller than the fence posts, which were 6 feet tall.
Yeah, that's probably the most of the thousands of cases I worked on. That is probably the case that convinced myself and my team that there was a lot more to the Bigfoot phenomena than any of us could ever imagine. So that goes back to the massive wave of 1973 and 74 in Pennsylvania. The incident happened up, again, Fayette County, not far from the Chestnut Ridge. It was October 25th, 1973, outside of the Uniontown, Pennsylvania, in a rural area. About 10:30 that night, I get a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown barracks. And when he called me, you could tell he was a little shook up. And he said, you need to get a team up here as soon as you can. I think there's a good chance something's stolen the pasture. When I find out about 9 o'clock that night, about 15 people in that rural area, they see this object in the sky. It's about as big as a barn. It's a big red sphere. And it's only about 100 feet off the ground, and people all over the area are watching this thing, and it's moving downward towards this pasture area. The story kind of focuses on the farmer's son who was coming out to visit his dad. It was at his dad's farm this was taking place, and as he's driving down the road, he sees the object and sees people standing outside looking at this thing, and he decides to go up on a hill to a different location, get a better view, and it looks like this thing's going to land over on his dad's farm. So he and two young neighbor boys decide they're going to go up to see what this thing is. So before they go up that area, they stop over to his dad's farm, and he picks up a .30-06 and a handful of ammunition. Included in that ammunition were 2 tracers. So anybody familiar with hunting knows that those tracers give you that luminous trail. Anyhow, as they're riding down the farm road and they're getting closer to the pasture, the dogs around the area are going crazy. They hear this loud, high-pitched whirling sound, and they hear these loud baby crying sounds. And they angle their truck with the headlights on to show the path to go up towards the hill, up towards the pasture. And they notice that the power appears to be draining. Something's draining the power from the headlights. They've never experienced that before. As they got to the top of the hill, they're looking over the field, and they cannot believe what they're seeing. Because that object, about 250 feet away, is now on the ground or right above it. But now, this thing is a big white dome, not a complete sphere. It's about 100 feet or more in diameter. It's illuminating the whole area, making a loud whirling noise. And they're standing there, and they're trying to figure out what this thing is. Then their attention focuses on a barbed wire fence line about 75 feet away. Along that barbed wire fence are these 2 tall, hairy, bipedal creatures, Bigfoot-type creatures, walking in their direction, one behind the other. The fence posts were about 6 feet tall. The creature in front is about 8 feet tall. The one behind is about 7 feet tall. These things are covered with long, dark, matted hair. They have no neck. The arms are so long, they're almost down to the ground. They have luminous, glowing eyes. They're actually bright, luminous green, which has been reported with some other Bigfoot incidents as well. You hear quite often about the red or reddish orange, but there have been reports of green. There's other colors as well. And these things are making that crying, whining noise, and they're moving one behind the other, slowly in the direction of the 3 witnesses. The one kid's watching these things. He's so scared he runs out of the field. The other kid yells at the farmer's son, shoot him, shoot him. The guy takes his first shot, which turns out to be a tracer. So he just had that luminous trail. But when he fires that second shot, that second tracer, the largest of the 2 creatures lets out a very loud whining, crying sound, reaches out as though to grab at that tracer. And at the exact same time, that object in the field disappears. It doesn't take off. It just physically vanishes. At that point, the luminosity, most of it's gone. The loud whirling sound is gone. And the creatures turn around at that point, slowly start walking along the fence line back towards the woods. At that point, the fella is firing now live ammo from his .30-06 at the creatures, and he's focusing on the largest creature. And until he passed away, he always said to me, he said, I'll never forget how that huge thing with those glowing green eyes kept staring at him as he's firing .30-06 live ammo into it with no effect on them whatsoever. They ran back to the truck, went back to the farmhouse, told the people what happened, took them to a neighbor, and called the state police. When the trooper arrived 45 minutes later, the witness told me, he told the trooper, he said, look, just forget about it. You guys think I'm nuts. And the trooper said, We had a report of two similar creatures on a mountain the night before. I had to investigate the incident. The short part of the story is they went up in the troop car up to the pasture. The state trooper told me the area where the object was on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said the farm animals wouldn't go anywhere near it. He said if he had a newspaper, he could have sat down within that glowing area and read the newspaper from the light coming off of it. Again, that's a short part of the story. The incidents got stranger and stranger through the night. I wrote the whole episode up in my Silent Invasion book. It's an amazing, amazing story, including the mystery men, one in a dark suit, one in an Air Force uniform, that came and visited him within the next 2 weeks. And for years, he always thought they were part of my research group. We didn't find that out until years later on a follow-up interview with him. It's an amazing, amazing story. That was the case, among others, that made us aware there was a lot more to the Bigfoot UFO phenomena than any of us could ever imagine.
Hey, Stan, let me ask you, what do you think of the idea of shooting at these things? I mean, doesn't it seem to be counterproductive? I mean, by this time, we know that any number of shots have been fired, and they don't seem to have any effect whatsoever. Doesn't it tend to piss off the creatures?
I agree. I do not recommend shooting at them. In the many years we were out in the field, we did not take weapons with us. And in multitudes of cases that I've talked about and written about, people have used all types of weapons, and nobody's ever brought one down. A couple cases, they hit them, they generally fell to the ground, generally got up and walked off. I can tell you, of the multitudes of cases I worked on, these things do not appear to be hostile to humans. They appear to be non-aggressive in most cases. Even in a case where people shot at them, sometimes the creatures chased them for a short distance and they turned and ran off. But generally, they appear to be non-aggressive. They seem to be interested in human activity. But I don't recommend people shooting at these things. And again, some of the cases are very strange, including the very well-documented February 6, 1974 incident in the Ohio Pile up in Fayette County again, right along the ridge, where a woman heard a commotion on her little cabin porch deep in the mountains, grabbed her shotgun, went out on the porch, and standing in front of her, a few feet away, is a 7 to 8 foot tall Bigfoot with its arms straight up over his head. She fires right into it with her shotgun, and the creature disappeared in a flash of light. And her in-laws, who lived 100 feet away, heard the gunshot. Her son-in-law grabbed his pistol, started walking up towards the cabin in the dark, saw a figure running up the road, said he was surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, started shooting at him randomly, and as he ran into the home, they noticed this large object with bright lights on it, like a big Christmas ornament hovering over the woods at the same time. And back at that time was when we had that big national trucker strike and gas rationing, so the National Guardsmen and state police were patrolling together. Both went up to the scene. I got there the next morning because I couldn't get gas. And the primary investigator told me, he said, I don't know what happened up here. He said, by the time we found the place, everything was gone. But he said something very weird went on. And he said he based that on how the animals responded. And that's something I have seen. I've never had a UFO or Bigfoot experience myself, believe it or not, but I've seen how the animals react, especially the most vicious dogs. When they're close to these creatures, they're like paralyzed in fear. They don't bark, they don't move, they cower, they cry. Sometimes they don't even act normal till a few days later. So that's something that's very intriguing.
And any animal mutilations?
They're not that common in this part of the country. We have had a few incidents. When this was going on in the 70s, we did have some dogs that had been killed unusually. There was chickens were found torn up. We hear about that on occasion, but it is very rare, even though I've had reports of Bigfoot carrying deer over their shoulders or chasing deer.
And Paul, how about you? Any negative aspect of this?
Yeah, from time to time there are abductions, of course, that's up for grabs. We have had issues of some cattle mutilation reports in New Hampshire. We also had a fish mutilation report. That was new to me, but I don't know. Fish look pretty sorry anyway when they're up on the beach for a couple of weeks. I don't know, but Nothing you really put your finger on, but I agree with Stan. They're not that common in this part of the country, but we have had a few whisperings. But as far as negative things are concerned, certainly, because our specialty, or at least my specialty, has always been what we call parasites, parasitical entities who will, they're part of nature. They'll mimic. They're multiversal, we think, but they'll mimic things like Uncle Chuck. You're convinced it's one of your loved ones, and they're actually pushing buttons so they can feed on your energy and this kind of thing. Folklore calls them demons and all, and they fill the bill. So yeah, we run into that in connection with a lot of these cases. Is that they do seem to be associated with UFO phenomena. As I say, that's why we deal with some of the MUFON people who run into the crossover phenomena. We don't necessarily haven't really seen Bigfoot as such associated with anything negative. Okay, so it's funny, you've got Bigfoot associated with UFOs and parasites associated with UFOs, but not so much parasites in Bigfoot, at least not so far, which is interesting.
Do you think that there'll ever be? Well, I don't even know what the word is here. There ever be an outcome to this? I mean, I can't imagine that there could be. I mean, the Bigfoot isn't going to step out of a ship and say, "Hey, I'm from Guatemala," or the reason that I'm here is because of such and such and such and so.
Well, I don't know. I kind of go ahead, Stan.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, I was just going to say I kind of agree with Stan Friedman that you don't expect this to happen, because why would they want to talk to us? We're, as he puts it, a primitive species whose primary activity is tribal warfare. Why would they want to talk to us? Even Bigfoot. I don't know.
Yeah, and again, what I want to stress is I'm not trying to say that Bigfoot is a passenger in a spacecraft from another world, because we don't know what we're dealing with. We don't even know what the UFOs represent. There's been many theories out there for years and years. I believe for a long time there's more than one origin for the unknown category. Could some of these, maybe a small percentage, be extraterrestrial? Possibly. More and more, again, for a lack of a better term, I think we're dealing with something, it's interdimensional. Time travelers, unknown natural phenomena, we don't know. But
it can't likely be interplanetary. I mean, these things just don't. Okay, I mean, we can't expect that they're going to behave exactly like we would. I mean, we're pretty bizarre too. We go to the moon and Mars, and we jump down a ladder and plant the American flag or whatever flag that we want to plant, and a race of beings there might say, well, what are these people doing, jumping around on our surface? They're banging on the hatchway to our town or something like that. But they do. I mean, they're just something so totally bizarre and freakish about their behavior. I mean, by this time, why would they need to abduct so many people, and why do they need to grab soil samples, and how come they come in 100 shapes and designs? Not only their craft, but the beings themselves. And if they're Bigfoot, why don't they shave before they land? I don't know.
That's exactly right. Again, for years and years when I started, everybody thought these things are extraterrestrial. Well, the more I learned about the phenomena, the more and more I'm getting away from that idea. I don't think we can eliminate the possibility of maybe a few of these reports could be. But again, with a lot of the UFO reports, these things, even in daylight, they physically change form. They appear and disappear. And I've studied the background. Some people who have had these encounters, I've had some strange things show up over the years. I remember years ago, there was a group of people, and only a small number within that group could see the object hovering over top of them, describing while the other people couldn't see it. So could it be that certain people have certain abilities, they're able to perceive this phenomena, or is it that the phenomena could be attracted to certain people? It's a very, very complicated phenomena. I think right now a lot of what we're dealing with is so far beyond our present scientific understanding that someday we'll have the instrumentation technology to maybe understand what we're dealing with. Right now, I think it's beyond our capabilities to understand.
Yeah, how do you, they talk about disclosure. Well, how could you disclose this? I mean, some people see it as a religion from a religious point of view. Some people like Stanton Friedman want to see it in a strict, scientific terms where the object can be weighed and the visitors can shake your hand even if they are contaminated. I don't think they want to come down and shake anybody's hand in the last couple of weeks. I wouldn't recommend that. That's for they're sure, but there's so many approaches to this. How does anybody in Washington or in the Pentagon, especially today, get on TV and have to explain any of this to the unwashed masses, because they're not going to follow it. They're going to think that Satan is behind this.
Well, I agree, and as I mentioned earlier, I believe the government knows a lot more than they're telling us, but I don't believe they know all the answers themselves. Are trying to figure it out. There's no doubt. I believe that they've been monitoring the phenomena for years and years around the country and around the world. They know it exists, but they don't have the answers themselves. They're not in control of what's happening, and they're just trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Oh yeah, well, and that's Greg Bishop talks about that, and I mean, he says that a lot of times government and military officials will basically almost grill UFO investigators because they think that possibly they may have more knowledge than the government or military does.
Yeah. Well, earlier Paul was bringing up about, are these mystery men that get involved in something, okay, are they government or are they somebody else? And I'd say we might be dealing with both. I can tell you during the 73 Bigfoot outbreak and UFO outbreak here, I was contacted by some government officials. I did meet with them. They were very interested in the research that was going on here. But also I received a phone call from a gentleman who told me he worked for the government. I was provided the name of a contact, the name of a laboratory in Washington. I was given the contact number and the address in the event that we came up with any really good, solid physical evidence of a Bigfoot or body for me to contact them. And I was able to confirm that that information was accurate. And other things have happened over the years which continues to suggest that I believe the government there's a good possibility they're interested in some of these cases.
We're headed towards the midnight hour here, where a Bigfoot will soon be banging on our front door and ringing our buzzer and wanting either candy or our hides. So I think we should go, Tim, around the table one time here and allow our guests to tell us what they're working on currently, how people can contact them, and what we can expect in the future. So, Stan, your turn.
All right. Well, people can become updated with reports and also different events coming up, which many, many things are planned throughout the year already coming up. So they get on my website, stangordon.info, I-N-F-O. My Silent Invasion book covers the 73s, all those weird things going on with Bigfoot and UFOs. I have Really Mysterious Pennsylvania. My recent book is Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures. Gets into all kind of very, very weird cryptozoology cases. Again, many suggest we're dealing with something that's not physical in nature. And they're all available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or signed copies through my website at stangordon.info.
And let's not forget the Invasion on the Chestnut Ridge, which is also available on Amazon.
Yeah.
And along with some of the other very groovy small town monsters. How can we forget about small town monsters? And Paul, this is your opportunity to suck a few of our listeners in.
Well, thank you, Tim. I don't know if I put it that way. You can start with BehindTheParanormal.com. There were over 730 hours of our show, CBS and WOON, and a few others that we've been on the air for almost 10 years. I've written some books, and together lately, Ben and I, my son, and co-host have been writing books together. The one 2016 that brought up by Schiffer Books is Behind the Paranormal: Everything You Know Is Wrong, and last year's book was Behind the Paranormal: Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of. So the first one is in stores. Both of them are on the website and the bookshop, and you're welcome to check that out. We'll autograph them for you.
We just got the 1-minute warning from our producer, Tina. And I want to tell, of course, our listeners, we have Cryptids from the Dark Realms, and the forthcoming, it should be out within a week or so, Weird Winged Wonders, with contributions by Paul and Brad and Sherry Steiger and everybody else who knows about weird wonders. And Tim, anything on your docket?
Oh, no, I'm just saying I just can't wait to read that book.
Well, it is a massive collection. It started out, it was going to be, just 100 pages. I think it's up to 250 now. Well, you know how we keep adding to it. And thank you, Peter. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for the staff of KCOR, who keeps us on the air, and to Tina in particular. And good night, all. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Files.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.